helping our veterans instead of hurting them. Hello, everybody. I'm David Schuster, and thanks for joining us on the conversation. Despite some changes, legislative changes and otherwise to the VA several years ago, there's still some stories that seem to be bubbling up of problems that our veterans are facing in dealing with the system. And they've been articulated in compelling fashion in a remarkable new book. It's called Wounding Warriors: How Bad Policy is Making Veterans Sicker and Poorer. The author joins us today is Dr. Daniel Gade, a retired US Army Lieutenant Colonel. He's also a professor and public policy leader. Dr. Gade, thanks for joining us. First of all, you were a combat veteran. You were severely wounded in 2004, required amputation. Tell us about that experience, both the injury and what it was like dealing with VA hospitals.
Yeah, so I was actually wounded in action twice. The first time was a year ago on November 10th. I'm sorry, it was the anniversary is November 10th every year. And then I was wounded the second time on January 10th, 2005, which is when I ultimately required amputation. And I spent about 6 months as an inpatient in the hospital at Walter Reed, which is a military hospital, not a VA hospital. And during that time, I began to notice something very disturbing in my fellow wounded warriors. And that was that a lot of people were becoming dependent on others in a way that was not warranted by their wounds. And in some cases, the conversation wasn't about how much I can get better, how can I thrive, how can I live with my new and serious disability. It was how much disability benefits can I get? And I didn't really understand why that was a problem until later when I went and got my master's degree and I went and worked at the White House doing veterans policy and really began to discover that we have a system that pays veterans to be sick and then at the same time wonders why we have so many sick veterans. It creates what we call perverse incentives in veterans recovery.
And that is an incentive not to work, because if you can tell the VA, hey, no, I really can't work because of my disability, whether that's true or not, you get more money.
That's right. There's a specific program, actually. I call it the worst, and it's a competitive field for what I'm about to say, but the worst program in the federal government is this program called individual unemployability, which literally pays veterans at the 100% rate, so about $3,000 a month, if they don't work. But if they try to go back to work, their benefit gets cut back to about $1,200 a month, depending on their specific circumstances. So think about that. You're separating a veteran from the labor market explicitly and basically creating a huge tax if he tries to go back to work or she tries to go back to work. And what we know about men specifically, it's really important for men. Their identity is derived from their work. Women can get their identity typically from work or from family. Men get their identity almost exclusively from their work. And this program separates veterans from their work or from their potential to thrive in society. And it's horrifying, right? That we have a veteran suicide crisis right now. 22 veterans a day are killing themselves. And yet we have systems that are promoting veterans or that are forcing veterans into this life of dependency and sort of lack of self-worth. And it's really, really bothersome. There are better ways to help veterans. And I lay it out in this book, Wounding Warriors.
Yeah, I mean, having your life sort of defined as, well, you are dependent on government checks because you can't work. I can imagine how depressing that is for a lot of people. You point out that, well, I'm a little confused though that this is still sort of out there, because a lot of our viewers, a lot of people who've been following VA policy will recall the beginning of the Trump administration. There was this remarkable VA bill legislation to sort of change how the VA is run. How was this allowed to stay out there? How come this wasn't closed?
Yeah, so part of this is a structural problem, a structural understanding problem. So the reforms that President Obama started with VA, the Mission Act and the Choice Act, I'm actually not clear which one. I don't remember exactly which one started during Obama and then which one started during Trump. But the two have similar reforms. But the reforms are on the healthcare only side. They allow veterans to get healthcare on the economy or on the civilian economy. They don't require veterans to be tied down to the VA hospitals and that kind of thing. But the premise of Wounding Warriors isn't really, the book doesn't really treat the healthcare side of the equation, because actually more than half of the VA's budget is spent on the disability side. So this book Wounding Warriors, is really a critique of the VA disability system that pays veterans to be sick. If you think about it, the healthcare system is trying to help veterans be better, and the disability system is paying them to be worse off. And so what you have is veterans who are paid cash, transfers into their bank accounts if they can present the worst symptoms possible. I always use, David, the analogy of the plow and the sword. Before military service, everybody's a productive plow. And then we bring them into military service and we heat them up and we sharpen them into swords and we use those swords for our nation's purposes. And then what we do after service is the purpose of this book, Wounding Warriors. And what I think we should do with those swords after they're not used for our nation's purposes anymore, we should reheat them and reshape them into productive plows. And that means reskill, upskill, and transition so that veterans can thrive in their communities rather than take those swords and throw them in the corner where they become rusty. You know, one of our people that we cite in the book, this woman whose name in the book is Molly. That's not her real name; it's a pseudonym. But she describes her, and this is a quote. She says that she felt like discarded government waste because of the way the disability system treated her.
And that disability system, in the course of talking with all these people for the book, it sounds like a lot of them felt enormous pressure to be dishonest in order to maintain their benefits.
Yeah, 100%. So I'll give you an example with post-traumatic stress disorder, for example. It's rated at either 30%, 70%, or 100%. And if you have these symptoms, you get a 30% rating. If you have these symptoms, you get a 70% rating. If you have these symptoms, you get a 100% rating. And so the incentive for a veteran is to, and you can do this, you can actually go onto the internet and Google, how do I get a 100% PTSD rating from the VA? And it says, okay, here you got to endorse these symptoms. You know, you have to say you have erectile dysfunction. You have to say you have nightmares. You have to say you have all these things. And get this, the person who is actually doing the evaluation has no clue whether any of that is true or not. So you can go in and present your sickest self or a fiction of your sickest self and get yourself to that 100% rating. And then here's the tragedy, David. There's no requirement once you receive 100% disability compensation from the VA. There is no requirement at all that you are seeking ongoing treatment. And so we see a huge drop off in people who are receiving mental health treatment once they get their 100% diagnosis. And it's a real human tragedy. I mean, we're talking, I don't care about the money. I don't care about the budgetary stuff. I care about the fact that we're creating a victim class in the minds of civilians who observe veterans and in the veterans themselves.
I would imagine that the original way this was structured was with some good intentions. And that is, if somebody does try to go back to work and it doesn't work for them and they can't do it, you want to make sure that they still get paid because they can't work. But so keeping in mind those folks who may try to get work and can't and need to sort of be able to fall back, what's the solution here in order to make sure that nobody sort of falls through the cracks?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, there is definitely a place for disability compensation. And in some cases, you know, you think about somebody who's been shot in the head and has serious cognitive deficits, serious life impacts forever. You know, we can't do enough for those people. Let's do more. Let's give them more resources, more caregivers, more stuff, more money even. But for people who could work or could not, depending on whether they get a high level of compensation, what we ought to be doing is helping them get the reskill and transition assistance they need so that they can get employed and get and earn this much instead of being given this much by the VA. In other words, our main focus, and I lay this out in the epilogue of Wounding Warriors, which, by the way, woundingwarriors.com, I'll send you a signed copy. Otherwise, you can get on Amazon and Audible and every place else. But what we ought to be doing is we ought to be helping veterans be their best selves rather than get this much for being their sickest selves.
And the great irony in this is that one of the topics we like to talk about is sort of the transition of the workforce, and that we're going from a society where, jobs, you change jobs every 10 years. Now it's, maybe every 2 years that, half of all the jobs that are out there are disappearing, and we won't have names for the jobs that are coming online over the next 10 to 15 years. I've heard from a lot of people, particularly in the medical field and hospitals, administration, who say their best recruits, the people who are best equipped to do the job, are military veterans because of the structure and that they got when they were in the service. And so there's certainly a recognition in certain sectors of our society. There's a place for veterans. We just have to give them the right training. And it also sounds like, though, we have to give them the incentive to be able to pursue it.
Yeah, it's definitely incentives. It's definitely extra training. If somebody leaves the military as an infantry soldier, there's not many civilian analogs to infantry work. And by the way, maybe you don't want to do infantry work your whole life. And so you want to be a leader, you want to be something else. So we owe those veterans, and this is something that we clearly owe veterans. We owe them a chance to be reshaped from that sword back into a plow, a better plow than they were before. but a plow nevertheless useful for civilian purposes. But this system, as bad as it is, has been in place really for over 100 years. President Eisenhower was blowing the whistle on this when he put his friend and West Point classmate Omar Bradley into a reform program and said, "Hey, you need to fix this." So that was 1956. So this has been going on a long time.
For a long time. And in the real short time we have left, how aware are members of Congress, legislatures about this? And is there the awareness to be able to tackle this?
Well, for sure, there's the awareness. The behind closed doors. I've worked at the White House. I've talked to these people behind closed doors. I'm friends with many of them, actually. But it's not awareness that's the problem. It's will. And the political left makes the mistake of believing that all veterans are victims and so they deserve everything. The political right makes the mistake of believing that all veterans are heroes and deserve everything. And then these very powerful interest groups stand under the deserve everything tree and shake it for money, not realizing or not wanting to realize that what they're actually doing is creating a victim class out of the very veterans that they purport to help.
Dr. Daniel Gade, the book is Wounding Warriors, How Bad Policy is Making Veterans Sicker and Poorer. Dr. Gade, a terrific project. Thanks so much for joining us on the conversation. We appreciate it.
A joy to be on with you, David. Thank you so much.
Yeah.